What is shadow work?
The shadow side is going to be much more focused on bending the rules. What would happen if you went against the status quo to actually have this bigger sense of vitality and this bigger sense of energy?
What we've been conditioned to believe is acceptable emotions and not acceptable emotions.
But if I've been raised as a man does not show emotion, can I even be vulnerable to myself when I'm on my own?
Get that energy moving through the body, because that's all it is. It's blocked energy, which is being repressed or suppressed or depressed.
But it's just understanding, how can I ask myself these confronting questions?
We're such complex beings and we're so unique in our own right. So Billy, can you tell us what is shadow work and why so many people are looking into it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's an absolutely massive topic. So I'm going to go in a very, very beginner friendly kind of angle for this, and then we can see where the conversation emerges from it all. But the idea in shadow work is it's based on Carl Jung, the famous Swiss psychiatrist, his work, which is essentially, just to really simplify things down, we've got two key parts of our personality work at any given point. We've got the persona, which is the mask that we put on, and that helps us to fit in outwardly. So it's the outward facing personality. And then the shadow side of the personality is essentially the compensatory function of that. So where the persona focuses outwards, the shadow focuses inwards. So probably an easier way of saying something like this would be, we want to be able to fit in one sense, but we've got to balance that with this really careful dynamic of also wanting to be a unique person. So we've always got this trade-off of who is it that I can be to others, but who is it that I need to be for myself as well. And there's never going to be an absolutely perfect dynamic with this. There's never going to be this perfect equilibrium. It's always going to be, sometimes I step over into being a bit more persona focused. Sometimes I step a little bit more into shadow focus. But the idea being ultimately that we learn to integrate the shadowy side to ourselves, if you like, to try to keep the introductory to this as very, like I say, beginner friendly as possible. Because when I see things online, there's this very, very sometimes superficial understanding that shadow work is essentially all just the evil aspects of yourself. And that's sort of relevant on a bigger scale, because you've got the personal and the collective unconscious, and it will definitely include all the parts of humanity that we really don't want to think about. But on a more grounded, practical, and actually useful everyday level, it's also referring to the things which, in our particular childhood and during our particular circumstances, certain things were encouraged and certain things were discouraged. And it's just about being able to reclaim the things which we feel have got some kind of charge to them. We feel like, oh, maybe if I was born in different circumstances, I would have been allowed to have been this type of person. And I feel like I want to explore this type of my personality. A classic example would be if you were an artistic child born in a very scientific family. It might be that you've been pushed a little bit more towards like the STEM subjects, but actually what you want to really pursue is your creativity, and that's where your passion really lies. So that would be something that would be relegated into the shadows or suppressed or repressed or whatever else it might be in terms of how you word it, just pushed into the shadow side of your personality, in the sense that it's there, it's dormant, it still has this very active charge in your life. And what we need to do is we need to realize that by getting in touch with that, we can actually start to feel more in tune with who we are or who we think we could become. There seems to be something that's worth exploring, which has got this transformative element to our personality. So it's one of those things which I won't lie, it's a bit of a buzzword online in terms of shadow work. You can basically, you can always search people typing in Carl Jung and shadow work. You don't really see so much of his bigger focus on all this, which is something called individuation, which is the idea of who is it that you're trying to become? What's the difference between the self with a lowercase s, the self with an uppercase s? Because they're referring to very, very different things within Jungian thought. But shadow work is a nice little introductory element of realizing in your life what has been encouraged, what has been discouraged, and what would I like to get back in touch with. And I think, considering there seems to be a bit of a crisis at the minute around meaning and around purpose and around anxiety and around just not having much control in our life, I think a lot of people are naturally looking online to try to move away from that social stigma of having to actually reach out to another person and say, I'm trying to explore this in myself, but it's just too confronting and I feel too vulnerable to be able to do it. So to be able to research something like this, maybe a little bit more privately online without having to open up to anybody else, it's a way of scratching that itch to realize, oh, do I now need to explore something a little bit further. So that's just like a little 3-4 minute overall summary of super, super beginner friendly, but the idea that the shadow is the inner facing personality compared to the persona, which is the outward facing personality.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for that. And it resonates so much as well. Like, I really think back to my childhood and what was acceptable or not acceptable from peers at school or teachers, or, like you said, recognizing I was more creative, not very academic at all. And then just what that was like trying to navigate that in a school system, which was all about testing, exams, being part of the standard, and just not fitting into any of that with dyslexia at all. And just trying to suppress certain aspects of my own personality in order to try and fit in or be accepted by the majority.
And it's such a shame because hearing that as well, I hear it having taught in schools for 10 years and working with a lot of clients from a mentoring and a coaching capacity as well. That mindset stays way beyond the school years because it's already formed a big part of your personality and who you think of yourself as being, because the shadow itself is referring to the unconscious material. We can't just sit there, journal, and figure out everything we need to do in our life because by definition it's unconscious. So we need to realize that through other people. And it's been fascinating to be able to talk to people about this because I always push as heavily as I possibly can reading as a habit, as an absolute cornerstone habit to be able to manage, because there's just in a very fast-paced life, the idea of sitting down with a book and actually really getting to know this author and getting to know the messaging of this, it can be so just nourishing and so rewarding. But the big block that I hear from most people is, but I can't remember it all anyway, so what's the point of reading? And that's the school-based mindset of coming in of we've internalized this idea that it's only worth studying things or only worth reading things if there's a test which I can pass at the end of it, which I can prove my worth towards. And if you take out of a 300-page book one single sentence which genuinely goes on to shape your life, that's absolutely fine. It doesn't have to be reduced down to quantifiable data of, oh, but a book is only worth it if I can retain 10%, but then on the next read, be able to retain such an amount. And then if somebody asks me about it, I can be able to say this because I've memorized this sentence and this passage. It's nothing to do with that. It's just, how can I use this on a practical level for a transformative aspect? Because that's what, again, shadow work is all about. It's understanding where the persona is very much about the order and the structure. The shadow side is going to be much more focused on breaking apart that order. Not necessarily being full on chaotic, but just about bending the rules and getting in touch with what would happen if you went against the status quo and the life that you're living to actually have this bigger sense of vitality and this bigger sense of energy and this bigger sense of passion, which might be dulled otherwise because of how you had to limit yourself and censor yourself according to your surroundings. You can see like it pushes into so many different areas, something like this.
Yeah, massively. And I think that really resonated what you just said about the reading in the books and trying to retain information. For me, it's the reframe that it's able to give me, like looking at all the content that comes in a book, but then what's the key message there, and how does that allow me to reframe a thought, an idea, a belief, a perception, whether it's about myself, about other people, or about the world at large. And then that's when the shift tends to happen for me. And certainly guys that you and I have worked with in the retreat capacity or in the coaching capacity, sometimes they say, I heard that 20 years ago, but I just wasn't able to absorb it or hear it or understand it. But hearing it now, based on the experiences that I've had, or the traumas, or the successes, or the failures, now it makes a lot more sense based on lived experience rather than what was an intellectual concept back then.
And that's it. And the same piece of advice then can land so differently. Like if you just said, let's say somebody was really stressed out and they had a million jobs to do at home, and you just said, right, well, just go and do the dishes. Like, what do you mean? How's that going to solve my life? In one sense, it's literally just doing the dishes, the most mundane thing in the world. But then, actually, after doing all this work and sometimes over-intellectualizing things and sometimes having these big debates, suddenly it's like, oh, I need to do the dishes. And there's a different flavor to it, there's a different texture to it, because in one sense, it's just the practical, mundane aspect of what it is that you are physically doing. But on the other side, it's, okay, without listening to music, without having to rely on any other sort of sensory-seeking behavior, what needs to be done, and am I willing to do it, knowing that when I'm doing the dishes, all I'm doing is doing the dishes. I'm not doing anything else. So there's this level of focus that comes in with it all. So in one sense, it can be just passed off as this trite piece of advice, which is just useless. But then at the same time, you can think about it for 10, 20 years and you'll come to the exact same conclusion, but it hits at a deeper angle. And that typically is going to happen when you start to integrate a lot of the unconscious or repressed material that we're trying to work with. It's trying to see things not just on a mundane angle, but also more of a symbolic angle as well. What does this represent as a principle or as a guiding rule if I was to apply this across my life? Because then suddenly we could then say, oh, I need to do the dishes. I can talk about that in a metaphorical way as well. And intuitively we can understand, oh, when I'm doing the dishes, I need to do the dishes. Like there's somebody who might be listening to this who's got a bit of a poetic mindset, that just that wording there and that tonality, that shifts everything. Now, if you're way more literal, you will just see it as, yeah, but I'm just doing the dishes. It still doesn't make a difference. And that's the whole thing. Like when we see a certain action, we need to understand it at different levels. You might understand something, like let's say we take, I don't know, I speak to a lot of people at the gym who say that they value discipline. That's absolutely fine. I completely agree that if they're at the gym and they're following a routine, they clearly are embodying discipline. But they're embodying discipline at one level. They're embodying it at a physical level. Now, we could also start to think about it as, how might you embody discipline on an emotional level, on a mental level, on a spiritual level? In terms of what we're talking about here, what are the shadow sides of looking at discipline? Where does it then start to become a bit of a problem when we overemphasize something like this? So in one sense, we need to be aware of, when we're looking at any particular thing, we've got a one mundane way of looking at it and one sacred or higher or bigger transpersonal way of looking at something. And then we've also got to be able to consider as well, how is this manifesting on all these different angles? Because to practice discipline on an emotional level might mean, actually it's got nothing to do with being the gym, going to the gym. It might mean sitting down and having a really difficult conversation with somebody, which has got a real emotional charge to it. And actually it's making you feel quite uncomfortable. But it's just understanding, how can you then voice your boundaries and make it really clear what you need and what they need? And can you be the person that actually meets those needs? Like, that is still going to be practicing discipline, but it looks extremely different to the man who's powerlifting at the gym. And if you think about that mentally, that's the reading habit. Like, a lot of people say they can't focus for more than 5-10 minutes, or they just get too distracted because they can't read. Well, mental discipline would be, can I put aside 5 minutes per day for 7 days in a row where I read? No excuses, doesn't matter what I actually remember from this book or not, but did I actually do that practice? So all of a sudden, we've started to look at a certain value and we've started to break it apart and analyze it on multiple different levels. And that's the bigger thing that I'm focused on really overall. It's understanding, how is one thing actually not just one thing, but how is it representative of everything in a holistic sense? And we just need to have an entry point and then break it all apart from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes so much sense as well. I think that would resonate with so many men. And again, guys that I've worked with, guys that you've worked with, and guys that we've seen together, when they talk about discipline and versus motivation in particular, and what that looks like, and how particularly we can get in this kind of loop of using work or exercise as seen as something positive, but which we throw ourselves into in order to avoid all the difficult stuff that's happening in other areas of our lives. And what we've been conditioned to believe is acceptable emotions and not acceptable emotions to show, either as men or as women or as adults or versus as children, and how that then keeps us quite locked in this idea of who we should be versus who we are as a full person, and able to access the full spectrum of our emotions and every aspect of our being and what we want to achieve day to day.
Yeah, I mean, it's the entire topic's like, it's just fascinating, isn't it? Because even on this, I mean, there's just so many ways to be able to explore something like this. And with the topic of this being shadow work as well, because you mentioned this idea there, which is, this idea of like somebody like going to the gym or being a certain way, and again, based on who they think they need to be, which is also based on how they happen to be brought up. But if you have a plan and there's a very realistic chance that you might fail at that plan, and you might have a very understandable fear of failure, potentially as well, something that isn't really talked about, a fear of success, of what happens if this goes well, what is my new responsibility if this actually goes well. But in accepting that there might be a failure here, there's this potential for a coping mechanism to come in. And if we realize, oh, actually, in this moment, I'm feeling really, really vulnerable. But as a man, I've been taught not to feel vulnerable. I've been taught to be stoic, and I'm using that in quotations there because of a very big misrepresentation of the word online sometimes. But if I've been raised as a man does not show emotion, a man is so focused on his goal that doesn't matter what stops him, he's got to be disciplined, he's got to be courageous, he's got to have his entire life on in order, he can never cry, whatever else it might be, whatever the rules are specific to your upbringing, that's going to flavor or change the flavoring of, can I even be vulnerable to myself when I'm on my own at home? And if you can't even be vulnerable with yourself, then we get into some pretty difficult territory, which is, what's it going to take? What's that first step that it's going to take for us to be able to open up to ourselves privately in our inner world before we even then start to see it outside in the outer world?
Yeah, 100%. And again, that comes back to emotions for me, like the guys that I work with and the women, well, men in particular, actually, where they say, I can't look at that because if I open the lid on it, I don't think it'll ever stop, because they've suppressed emotions for so much of their life. They've learned how to compartmentalize everything. They've learned how to firefight in the moment, be able to respond, react, and process what's happening. But all the other stuff that they've pushed to one side in order to be able to deal with what's going on in front of them, they never end up looking at it. So all of a sudden, you've got this stress bucket that just keeps filling and filling and filling over 10, 20, 30, or an entire lifetime. And all of a sudden, they're like, I can't look at that because I know how much is back there. And if I just lift the lid on it a little bit, it's going to be this entire tsunami that's going to come through. And how do I stop that? And that fear that so many men have as to, I can't go there, not even with myself. It's like, oh no, it's fine. And then they just use banter or diffuse it or problem solve or offer a solution or just ignore it. Or, like you said, have a coping mechanism which just overrides it.
And for me, that's the beauty of doing all of this inner work, because the the realization, and it's a subtle realization, but it's the fact that in realizing that we don't want to look at something like this, which is just too difficult, and we need to have this coping mechanism to be able to manage the emotion, or the to avoid the emotion, to avoid the experience of it. It's realizing, actually, even though I don't want to look at it, it's still like pulling the strings behind the surface. Like, even though I can't see exactly what's causing the problem, it's still causing the problem. It's still pulling me to do one thing or to avoid another thing. And that's the important part when we talk about like this being in the unconscious mind, which we need to be able to pull to our conscious mind, because it's the idea of, I always try to word it like this for the people who might be watching this rather than listening to it. If we've got like an idea operating behind the scenes behind my head, like represented just by my fist back here, the idea is, if it's back here, I don't know that that exists. It's having an impact, but I literally can't see it, I can't sense it, I can't experience it in any way. So what I need to do is I need to pull it round to basically where I can see it. And that might be a bit too confronting at first. So maybe I just need to put it in my peripheral vision. So I can basically peek at it and realize, oh, right, I don't like this, but I can at least now start to accept it. And then it moves a little bit over, and a little bit over, and a little bit over. And then suddenly I can see it for what it actually is. And I think, oh, this feeling of powerlessness that I was trying to cover up by asserting my own power over other people, I've realized, actually, although I feel powerful in the moment, it's coming from the fact that it's covering up a weakness. It's covering up what I consider to be a flaw in my personality, rather than coming from a genuine place of strength. It's not coming from a place of, I want to grow towards this, to be this powerful person, and to think about how much good I can do with all this power. It's coming across as, or it's coming like from the deep root of, I really cannot have other people to truly see me as powerless, because something bad will happen. And that's where shadow work comes in. It's realizing, okay, what is this coping mechanism trying to like cover up, trying to help us understand, and then to learn how to embrace the experience rather than try to avoid it. So not even just tolerate the experience with gritted teeth, but to be able to like genuinely try to breathe into it and be like, I'm not really happy that this is the conclusion, but this is the conclusion. This is the facts that I'm dealing with. I can butter it up however way I like, but the fact of the matter is, in my particular circumstances, this is the shadow material, this is the shadowy content which has been pushed away, and now I'm just going to pick some part of it. It's not to integrate everything, because there's a lot of things that we don't want to integrate as well. This isn't about becoming God and integrating every possible aspect of everything that it could be to be a human. There's going to be limitations, and there has to be limitations to be able to be effective in the world as well. But it's just realizing, what's that first step? What's that one thing which I feel like I want to explore? And it might have a bit more of a gut feeling approach to it. There might be a bit more of an intuitive experience to it. You might be able to sit down, journal, and intellectually figure it all out and think, yeah, actually, I've worked it all out. This is what I need to figure. You can access it however way you like. If you're mind focused, access it that way and then drop it into the body, and to make sure you can actually see that behavioral change. If you're much more in tune with your emotions and you don't associate as being particularly logical whatsoever, go in that way and then raise it to that level. But the idea is we are constantly raising it to the mind, dropping it to the body, raising it to the mind, dropping it to the body, in service of the behavior, in service to who you want to become.
Yeah, 100%. And that makes so much sense. And I know that you and I are quite different in that regard. Like, you're very intellectual, very cognitive based, and I'm very much in my body, very much in my feelings, emotions. And it's really interesting seeing how we communicate on that and how that shows up for us in different ways. But I think for many men, there is a real disconnect from their body and how they actually deal with things on a day-to-day basis. And that sense that potentially the body isn't a safe place to be. So using that logic, that reason, that intellect, that problem solving, that solution finding in a way of exploring something and trying to find resolution with it. But I think as well, what you were saying a moment ago, it all links back to what are those early childhood experiences. It's not to say that you've got some massive big T trauma, but something as simple as a sentence from somebody at a point when you were vulnerable or you didn't have a great sense of self or identity or boundaries could have internalized this belief that you are X, therefore this isn't available to you, or you're not the type of person that can achieve this. And understanding, okay, that then forms a pattern of thought, a pattern of emotion, a pattern of habit that plays out through our lives, either consciously or subconsciously, but we recognize it subconsciously when we say things like, why does this always happen to me? Or why do I always get into relationships that end up like this? And it's because on a subconscious level, there's stuff which is playing out in our shadow, which we're not aware of, that's actually informed by something that happened so long ago. And we might have our partners say to us in different relationships, oh, you always do this. It's like, no, I don't. But again, the idea of going there or looking at something or acknowledging it as we're responsible in part for how we're showing up in the present, but not necessarily responsible for what happened to us in that activating event or the thing that formulated that initial internal belief when it happened so long ago. And like you said, the fear, the anxiety, the worry, the shame, the guilt, the embarrassment of going there, possibly exploring it in a safe way with somebody, whether that's a counselor or a coach, and being able to gently unpick it and start having some curiosity around that to see where can that change start to happen.
That's a really key point with it all, I think, that curiosity, because naturally with a lot of these values or a lot of these tendencies or attributes or traits or characteristics, however you'd like to word it, typically if we associate them as being, I'm just going to say broad strokes here, negative, as in I don't want them. If I can't see them in myself, but I can see them in another person, there's probably a good chance as to why you've realized that particular element in that other person and not in yourself. It's probably because you realized to some degree that you've projected something that you don't want to see in yourself onto that other person, because it would hurt your sense of self too much to realize, oh, actually, this trait is mine. I'm the kind, I'm the patient, I'm the humble person, but somewhere in this room I'm sensing arrogance. I've checked myself, it's not me, I'm not arrogant, so it must be you, so you can have that. That's essentially what we're talking about when we talk about like this idea of projection. It's you've done something, and this is usually completely overblown, but the idea is, well, I've checked myself, I've done the system analysis, there's no arrogance here, but I can sense it somehow, so you can have it. And then if that other person isn't really doing much to be able to justify having that arrogance, it just gets blown up into the bigger like world picture. Then it doesn't become it doesn't become you, it becomes it then becomes this idea of, well, the world's just unfair, that's what they always do. And when people talk in really big terms like they or them or that's just how it is, like other kind of thought terminating cliches like that. That's a good idea that actually we need to reverse that process. So from I to you to it, if we can then start to see something in the bigger world which we don't like, to then reverse that it to you to I, which I'm happy to talk about another time because I realize it's an absolutely massive topic. But it's just realizing that sometimes it's quite hard to actually see these things in yourself. So you actually need external prompts to act as almost cues to be able to do this inner work in and of yourself. You raised a really interesting point before, though, which was this idea of like being in touch with the body. And you're someone who is obviously like, the main way you process things is through the body, whereas for me, it's like through the mind. So for somebody who is listening to this and is thinking, actually, I don't really feel anything in my body, I don't really know what to do about all of this. Like, has there been any like moments in your life where you've been able to work out from a bodily based perspective what you need to do rather than just intellectually, just to be able to give a bit of advice either to another person like this or just from your own experience?
Yeah, for sure. So for me, things show up in my body as headaches, migraines. I tend to hold my breath, clamp my jaw. So in moments in my life where there's been a lack of communication or a block in communication um, with other people in my life, I will clamp my jaw. I'll swallow my emotions. I'll hold my breath. I'll do shallow breathing. And then that clamping of my jaw leads to muscle tension in my head, and that leads to headaches, migraines, cluster headaches, which I've had extensively at different points in my life. But recognizing, okay, ultimately it's coming from a place of I don't feel I can express myself verbally, and I'm swallowing that, and then how that gets stored and locked in the body in different ways. So then doing something like a breathwork practice, or even learning to like sing, like even just singing in the shower or singing at home, or it doesn't matter if you sound absolutely atrocious, it's just for you when nobody else is around. But it's this way of just getting, again, without trying to sound too hippy dippy, get that energy moving through the body, because that's all it is. It's blocked energy, which is being repressed or suppressed or depressed. And then that's how it shows up and manifests in different ways of anxiety, stress, overwhelm, burnout, depression, disconnect. And I think that then pushes us into this place of hyperarousal, so anxiety, fight, flight, or hypoarousal, which puts us into this grey area of disconnect where we don't feel anything at all and we become depressed. So recognizing that physicality of that, and like you said, then realizing, oh, okay, even if I can't yet at this moment express what I need to express to the person that I need to talk to, there's another way of being able to open up my voice box, where that's just with a breathwork practice, going to speak to a professional, or maybe just doing some singing at home. But it's just recognizing there's different things that we can do in order to open up stuff in our bodies.
I think that's definitely the thing, isn't it? It's looking at options that are potentials without necessarily saying, here is objectively the ranking list of starting at number 1 all the way through to number 50 as options for all humans on the planet. This is going to be a very unique and individual process for every single person. But I think that's there's already there, I think, 2 pieces of practical shadow work integration, which is, from my perspective, looking at it very much on an intellectual perspective of what is it that I'm actually seeing in another person, in the world itself, and then using what I've seen almost like as an abstract level, and then bringing it down into the body to be able to use that as a bit of a prompt. So I can sense that from a lot of these different experiences, this is a person who is arrogant, and this person was arrogant, and this person was arrogant. Oh, there's a reason why I picked up on arrogance 5 times today. What's that telling me about myself? And then using that basically to reverse engineer what it is I need to learn about myself. Whereas from your perspective, it sounds like you could actually do it the exact opposite way around, which is realizing where that moment of tension is in your body, locating where that actual bit of tension is, because there might be some people who are listening to this and who are thinking, okay, I really resonate with the headache side, but for me, it's more like IBS. For me, it's more like having a lower back. For me, it's more having like tight hamstrings. It doesn't matter what it is. It's the idea that there's a physical cue to be able to then think, okay, there's something worth exploring here. Where is it that I'm being overly tense? And where am I literally trying to protect myself from? Could be like a challenging thought or a difficult emotion. again, this is where, if we go back to Carl Jung, he actually has another idea which is called active imagination. And it's the idea that you then start a dialogue with that part of you. You literally start to question what's turning up, what is it that you need me to know. So it's almost like making the headache a person or a personality in itself, and not forcing your ideas and your answers onto it, but asking it, like, what is it that you want? Where have you come from? What are you trying to protect me from? What do you need? What support do you need for me to be able to, like, do whatever else I need to do at this point in time? If I think about it in terms of my stomach, what is it that's trying to get my attention at this point in time? What is it specifically that I'm feeling afraid of? And with all of this, I'm trying to make it as clear as possible that I'm asking, like, what based questions, or how do I fix this based questions, or where has this come from kind of thing. It's not why, because then we just get stuck into this difficult mindset of trying to move into explanation. And sometimes we don't know an explanation. We don't know why we do certain things. So it helps to remove some of the pressure around coming up for a reason to then just justify that reason as well as to why we are the way that we are. It's way more useful to be able to think about it as what's trying to get my attention, how is it doing it, and what's it trying to tell me. That'd be way more useful, just to be able to like combine those two things together.
Yeah, I think that's really, really key. What is it trying to tell me? Because ultimately it's a safety mechanism, isn't it? It's recognizing that the body's having a knee-jerk response to something like a headache or IBS or breaking out in hives, and it's having this physical response telling us that something isn't right, something needs to be looked at, and here is what it is. And it's just being able to start exploring that. And I think, again, when you start to see dysfunction in the body, how it shows up, and it ultimately being a symptom of something that we might be subconsciously aware of or unconsciously aware of, it starts to just change how you view things, and that level of self-awareness as to, okay, maybe there's something here that I can change. Because it's amazing when you do start moving stuff from the subconscious into the conscious, and then you start implementing that change, how the physical responses in the body can start to clear up very, very quickly.
Yeah, like almost like magically quickly at times.
Yeah.
And with something like this, like if we go back to the previous example of it being like doing the dishes, which is a mundane thing, but also like you could arguably consider it more of a symbolic thing, depending on how we look at this. I'm very aware at this point in time, I've got really, really bad hay fever. I'm trying really hard not to sneeze as we're recording this. Sometimes things are just what they are. Like, this is literally just a biological reaction, and I've got hay fever, and there's not actually anything. Like, I could sit here and over intellectualize it all day of, oh, actually, when I think back to such a time in my childhood, then this must be where it then starts to constellate in my personality. But sometimes it is just what it is. So there is that element of when we're moving things from this unconscious to the conscious, it doesn't mean we always have to do something with it. It's just making it a habit of practicing questioning things, trying to get into this habit of, okay, even if I don't do anything with this, have I at least thought about it? Rather than just coming to a conclusion, rather than just reading something online and just assuming it applies to me, have I done the actual key part of all this, which is the thinking process? I won't start half an hour into this, a big rant on AI and chat GPT and everything else like that. But if you find yourself outsourcing the key thing that makes you human, which is your thinking process, then it's worth considering, okay, well, if I'm having problems of depersonalization, I'm having problems around anxiety, I'm having problems around meaning, and I'm not currently thinking about where it is that I've been and where it is that I'm going, then the thinking element is the key part to all this. And that's where we need the shadow work to be able to supercharge this process. It's this idea of trying to understand it as, where have I been too ordered and too structured in my life, and it's actually started to sap away at my life essence. It started to sap away at my vitality and the energy that I've got, because all of this, these are limited resources. I've only got so much focus and so much attention that I can actually deliver in a day. So where is it going to be useful to be able to, in one sense, optimize it in a certain area, but in another sense, free up the reserves, which I've been wasting on other things overall. And it might be you pick a value or a trait or a characteristic, you start exploring it, and you realize why it was like unconscious in the background in the first place. You realize actually it's not really adding anything to my life whatsoever. And now that I've looked at it, now I can consciously put it in a box and think, I'm going to come back to that as and when I need it. I thought I really needed patience at this point in time. It was pushed away from my childhood, and now I've actually started to really incorporate it in my life. But I've realized actually it's getting in the way. I need to act more decisively. I don't need to be more patient at this point in time. But now that I'm aware of it, I can put it over here instead. And there's a very, very different energy behind consciously deciding to put things to one side to unconsciously not even be able to look at something, even though it might be the exact same value or the exact same characteristic. The whether it's consciously or unconsciously considered, it's extremely important. Abraham Maslow talks about this quite a lot in terms of we being focused more around like a growth oriented mindset, or is it more like a safety seeking behavior? Ideally, we want to try to maximize the advantages of moving towards growth and minimize the anxieties associated with safety, knowing that there's going to be both anxieties and delights in both safety seeking behaviors and also growth seeking behaviors. So understanding that we're just ultimately a complicated person and we can't come up with a set of rules that just perfectly encapsulates our entire life. So we need to constantly update it and think about it. And this is a dynamic process overall. If somebody listens to this now in, let's say, June, July 2025, then if they came back to it in 2026, they might hear the exact same words and might land in a completely different way. And that's because they're going to have updated their life situation. If they're thinking about things in exactly the same way, that's probably a good sign that you've been a bit too much persona oriented. You've actually not shifted your life too much, and you're thinking about things exactly the same way as you have done previously. It might be that actually, where is this as a shadowy style question for a practical element? Where is all of this order and all of this structure actually starting to have a negative impact on my life rather than a positive? And there's always going to be this really fine balance with it all, but it's just understanding how can I ask myself these confronting questions, because these are the things that shake up the status quo. They make sure that I'm being true to who I am, not just being the people pleaser that is trying to fit into all people at all times. So there is this balance of who am I deeply and who is it that I need to be able to fit in. The outward facing personality and the inward facing personality to be able to come back full circle to where we started. It's this never-ending process and this constantly shifting process as well.
Yeah, 100%. As you just expressed that, I think what came up for me was recognizing where discipline, focus, and structure I've always struggled with. Mm-hmm. So recognizing where I have a lack of patience or I have a shortened focus, and it's taken me most of my adult life to realize, well, not to realize, I've always been aware that I've struggled with the idea or the concept of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 work week. And that's what we're taught to fit into as a society, mm-hmm. and what we're trained to work towards from school. But what happens if you don't fit that mold? So this idea of, okay, what professions are going to suit my abilities or my intrinsic things that make me uniquely me, and how do I then fit into a society with those? So recognizing that, if I'm doing study, I can only focus for like 20 minutes to half an hour. If I'm with people, then an hour max is what I can really give intense focus to, so long as I don't have to write or study at the same time. I can just give direct focus to somebody. So recognizing what does that look like for me to create a life, a work, a business, relationships from the other end of the spectrum of not fitting into a mold, but recognizing how do I fit in a way that is unique to me, where I'm not overloading my nervous system or my cognitive capabilities, and recognizing, there is a way of living my life where I can still earn money, have a good job, have long-term relationships, but it's just figuring out what are the boundaries, what are the parameters, what are the preferences, and how do I start articulating those and implementing those in my day-to-day life.
Exactly, and so much of what you're saying there is relevant, like directly to shadow work, because even just that example before of, let's say I can only focus for 20 minutes, or I need to do like work for 20 minutes. Like what I really obsess over and absolutely love is questioning where that was even learned to begin with. So why 20 minutes, no, not 10 and not 4 hours? Like who is it that has been so influential in my life for me to now have in my mind the default being 20 minutes, as using like that as a direct example, because I've got tons and tons of examples like this in my life of who is it that set that as like the anchoring point? Because there's no reason why it couldn't have been, like, say, 5 minutes. There's no reason why it couldn't have been 4 hours. When you look at some people, when if you looked at my life at this point in time, like, because there's a big worry around like things like burnout and things like that in society, which is completely understandable. I work at my best, starting realistically at 5:30 a.m. in the morning. Between 5:30 and 6, I wake up. I'm fully switched on. I've already pre-prepared from the previous day what it is that I need to get on with, and I immediately get on with the task. And it's usually from about 6 a.m. till 10 a.m. I can do 4 hours of really deep focused work. Now, if I put that out there as a blanket rule for everyone else to follow, there'll be a lot of people, especially night owls, who'll be thinking, this is insane. How on earth could this possibly work? But it's because I know through trial and error and through practice, I'm useless when it gets to like midday. But the midday slump between 12, like midday, and let's say 4 or 5 o'clock, I do not do good work in that time. It takes me twice as long to produce work that's half as good. So I would much rather focus in on where my energy naturally starts to flow, which is very early morning, to then take essentially what is going to be like the afternoon off, to then return back to it in the evening, to then set up the next day and get into the flow that way as well. Now, obviously, I've been a teacher in a classroom for most of my life, so that's not worked well whatsoever. So there is always a compromise of who is it that I need to be and what actually are the constraints of the environment. I know for a fact most of my best lessons in a school day were periods 1 and periods 2 because they typically happen between 9 and 10 and 10 and 11. Like, depending on what school you're in, it's going to be like up until really a maximum of like half 11, 12. And it's not to say that my afternoon lessons were terrible, but they felt more difficult because I didn't feel like I had full access to all the resources that I knew that I could access in a perfect situation. So there's a bigger life planning question around all this, as well as like how much of your ideal life fits in with your current life and vice versa. Are you actually like leagues apart from where you want to be and how you want to live, or is it actually quite close and you can just make a couple of tweaks to be able to move it into that direction? So again, with all of this, it becomes this bigger life question of what is it that I'm living for? How is it that I'm living? How am I getting in touch with what makes me me? And what happens if I uncover something that actually makes me more of myself than I even previously could have thought of? To go back to that artistic example of that child raised in a family that really pushes like the STEM subjects, it might be that they're able to find this perfect balance between creativity and engineering, and that itself is like it just really ticks all the boxes for them. But it might be another child born into the same family fully pursues an artistic career as a painter. Someone else fully pursues one in like strict traditional engineering. All three of them could be completely fulfilled as children within the same household, but it depends on what they've done, how they've thought about the process, and what they've needed to integrate at different times in their life as well. It's not an easy topic to really summarize down, is it?
No, it's so wide. It really
it's
is.
hundreds of hours of material for what counts as like shadow content, if you want to consider it that way.
Yeah. But it's great because it's so vast and there's so many different facets to it and it's so multidimensional. And it's recognizing, wow, we're such complex beings and we're so unique in our own right. And we live in this society as a species. We've created all these ideas or concepts of what success is, what a man is, what a woman is, what it means to be influential, powerful, have status. And they're all just ideas. They're all just concepts and these limitations that we've put on ourselves. And we get to define for ourselves what we want those things to be. But based on our religion, our culture, our upbringing, society, family, all these other things that we think we have to be in order to achieve X. And it's only when we get to this point where we really start questioning who we are, what we do, and what we want in life. And for some people, that's in the 20s. Other people, it's when they're 50, 60, 70. There's no right or wrong. It's just when we get to that point in our journey where we think, actually, is this working for me? Or is there something better than this? And how do I achieve it? And then that's where shadow work can start to come in. And we can start exploring those deeper aspects as to what am I suppressing or repressing or not really wanting to focus on? And what happens when we start to explore that? And what does that afford us going forward to
Yeah.
implement change?
just a really practical way on you just to backtrack about a couple of minutes there was a really nice way that you worded it, which is to borrow a term from acceptance and commitment therapy. There's this idea of workability, which is it doesn't really matter if anything is right or wrong. We're not talking about like this black or white kind of distinction and this false dichotomy. The idea is ultimately, is this working for you to move you towards this desired future that you know that you want for yourself? If yes, then that is going to be considered workable. If no, then it's considered unworkable. And if something seems important but is currently unworkable, basically maybe we're thinking about this in a bit of a grander scale at this point in time. So what are the smaller steps and what are the beginnings that we need to be able to do this? If you are not a runner at this point in time and you want to be able to run a marathon, you don't just go from I'm going to buy some trainers and run a marathon. I mean, you technically could do that. There'll be some people out there that can do that, but probably not that many. It's going to be a bit easier to think, right, on my running journey, I need to go from, if I work backwards and reverse engineer the process, I need to be able to do a marathon, half marathon, 10K, 5K, and I'm going to drop into a mile for the first part there. And then the idea is, rather than focusing on the marathon as that super end goal, we're thinking about it as how do I go from being a non-runner to a runner? It doesn't really matter. We'll hit those milestones on the way, but how is it that I go from being not this label to this label, from not doing this thing to doing this thing? And then you'll realize actually, the more that you enjoy running, the less important it is that you're doing a 5K or a 10K or a half marathon. The bigger thing is that you're running and that you're enjoying the feeling of being in your body, which is, again, another huge aspect of this, because we could over mechanicalize this process and we could start to think about ourselves as running is only worthwhile if I get a personal best. And to get a personal best, I need to do this. But then you're treating yourself sometimes a little bit too much like a machine, and that removes the genuine first person perspective enjoyment of the run itself, which is, what am I running for? That's the ultimate foundational question, really. I mean, we could go a little bit lower, but that's a much more useful foundational question of why am I running? What am I running for? Who am I when I'm running? And if I like that, why do I like that? So that's how you would make things workable compared to unworkable. If an idea or a goal seems important, but it's just too big, what happens if I broke that down into 5, 10, 20 steps and then focus on doing step one, which might be putting your shoes on and going for a 2-minute run? Like that might be where you start, and that's absolutely fine. For some people might think that's nonsense, that's not going to get you anywhere. In that case, for that person, your starting point might be 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Someone else might be thinking 2 minutes, that's a long time to be running. In that case, start at 1 minute. If you're thinking 1 minute, start at 30 seconds. The point is you're making active progress towards something. Now, thankfully, running is very quantifiable. You can actually put numbers to it all, but the exact same thing is going to happen repeatedly. No matter what it is you're doing, you can't really quantify, arguably, let's say, creativity, but could you time block 10 minutes a day where you are going to express your creativity? And then it's just a binary yes or no. Did I turn up to be creative, regardless of what it is that I actually created or not at the end of it? Did I turn up and attempt to be creative? And if you can develop the momentum that way, that can be quite useful as well. But yeah, I just wanted to just drop in that idea of workability, unworkability, because exactly what you say, it's got to work for you and it's got to work for your future. Ultimately, how is this in service to who you want to become? And that's the juicier question in something like this.
Yeah, 100%. And again, just those examples that you gave there, sometimes because we've not necessarily considered how do I start to change a pattern of thought, behavior, habit, or belief, it's recognizing we can use these different skills, like you just said with running, looking at how you break down working up to a marathon. How do we look at then applying that to our emotions, or start to be more aware of our emotions and how they're showing up? So, for example, if we don't feel connected to our emotions or understand them, a good way into that is like through the body. Okay, when I'm having this experience, what happens inside my body? Do I feel like a lump of ice cold in my stomach, or do I feel my throat closing up, or do I feel like my head just gets really tense, or do I feel that I just want to run out of the room and leave the situation? Okay, so if you could ascribe an emotion to that, what would it be? Okay, you can't ascribe an emotion to that. If you ascribed a color to it, would it be red or blue? Okay, what do we associate with the color red or blue? Is it something which is cold and disconnected, or is it something fiery and hot? Okay, so what's something that we ascribe with being hot? all right, something which could be really intense, or could it be anger or frustration or resentment? And there's just different avenues and pathways into understanding. Sometimes we might not have the answer, but there's different techniques that we can use from a coaching perspective, from a counseling perspective, that can get us into these spaces where previously we've not had access to.
Absolutely. I mean, there's, I mean, once again, there's just so much with all this, isn't there? We can unpack it in so much, and just it'd be interesting to see how many people listening to something like this would associate heat or coldness with something like this, because let's say as an extremely introverted person, I'd be not at all surprised if people describe me at certain times as being quite a cold person, in the sense of I'm you'll know better than anybody. I'm not very touchy feely. Like, I will happily offer a handshake, I'll offer a hug if needs be, but I don't really gain anything from that. I'm much
Yeah.
more like the hands off type of person, which to someone who is very touchy feely, like, was going to understand that as like, oh, what's going on there? Like, there might be a conclusion that somebody jumps towards, which is, this person is so cold. What have I done to upset them? And again, that
Yeah.
could be used as a bit of a prompt with it all as well. But actually, the exact same thing could be understood completely differently, where I could easily understand, like, my current library building project is, it's an extremely solo, introverted passion that I've got at this point in time. But the energy that gives me, I would describe that as like a fierce, burning passion to be able to develop this library. It's what my entire life is dedicated towards at this point in time in my life. So in that sense, there, although in one sense I could be viewed in a cold, detached, separated way, in another sense it's a very intense heat that's also relevant at the same time. And it could be interesting to see where people start to move their attention or move their language towards their attention with all of this, because shadow work sometimes might seem very cold, very detached, very separated from what's going on, or it could easily be understood in the exact opposite way of, this is far too much, this is like a burning intense heat with it all. And it ultimately comes down to, how is it that you relate to this experience, or the lack of this experience, if we're going to go down the negative alternative version of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like you said, there's so many different routes that we could go in exploring this. But for now, I think that's given people some idea as to what shadow work is and what it encompasses to some degree.
Yeah.
But if people want to check this stuff out more, check out Billy's YouTube channel, Mr. Clark's Classroom on YouTube. We're also going to be doing a shadow work day retreat later in the year. So we'll post the links in the bio with this video as well, so that you guys can check it out or get in contact with us if you've got specific questions, if you're interested in working with us as well. So thank you very much for today, Billy.
Yeah, no problem at all. Just as one last little message, just to end it all with as well, just to make it all nice and clear, as we're talking here about like quite charged topics, and I would always just ethically and morally want to make it really clear: prioritize your physical safety first, prioritize then also your psychological safety, and once those two are in place, use that as this really safe and secure foundation to then start exploring some of these worlds, if you like, or some of these traits or memories or ideas, whatever else it might be, because you want to ultimately make this a place where this can be integrated back into you and your personality. You don't want to be just confusing intensity for insight unnecessarily. You want to be able to make sure that, yeah, this is a safe, repeatable practice over time. So I just want to make sure, just, yeah, on a ethical note, just to end it all: physical safety, psychological safety, get those two in place before anything else, and then use that as a lovely little launch pad to go from there.
Yeah, amazing. Really key point that. Thank you very much, Billy.
Thank you.